You are watching the Deadfoot Diver Podcast with Curt, the Deadfoot Diver.
Welcome to the Deadfoot Diver Podcast, where we talk about everything diving, technical diving, and especially the benefits of diving with disabilities. I'm very honored today to have with me one of the leading hyperbaric physicians in the world, Dr. Simon Mitchell. How's it going?
I'm going good, Curt. How are you?
Awesome. Very nice to talk to you. Thank you very much for joining me today.
It's a pleasure.
So first of all, tell me how you first got into doing diving and then medicine.
I was very lucky. I grew up in a seaside suburb in Wellington, New Zealand, and diving was just what the kids did. You know, we wore jerseys and t-shirts. We didn't have wetsuits. We'd dive off a beach and, you know, had sticks with nails tied to them to try and catch fish. And it was just a kid's activity. And I just fell in love with it. Everything I saw just had this magic about it. And from that point on, virtually every decision I've made about my career, my recreational activities, it's had some kind of diving flavor to it. So after that, I progressed from snorkeling to scuba diving. I did a degree in marine biology, worked in that field for a while, and figured out actually at an early stage that what people are most interested in marine biology these days is how many fish they're allowed to catch, rather than the biology of the actual fish, which is what I was interested in. And so my other passion was diving. It was becoming diving physiology and the medicine associated with it. So I decided to do medicine, so changing career in my late 20s, and went to med school. And so that's where the medicine side of it came in. But, you know, consistent with what I said before, I just carried on making diving-related decisions. So after med school, I went to the Navy. That was the only place to learn diving medicine. So I was in the Navy for about 8 years, operational dive team, diving medical officer. And after that, I decided to do hyperbaric medicine for a while full-time and ultimately anesthesiology. And that's kind of where I am now. But throughout it all, there's been this diving thread. And after the Navy came technical diving, where, you know, I was able to apply some of the stuff that I'd learned and done in the Navy to my recreational diving career. So, I mean, that's kind of a quick potted history of me. Yeah.
You've actually done some pretty impressive diving from what I've seen. Like, you do a lot of rebreather diving, which I was actually told by Peter Mesley when he was on. Because you guys dive together. He actually showed me a picture of you guys going off the front end of a loader to jump in.
Yeah, that picture got us into a whole lot of trouble, actually. There was a helicopter that crashed in a freshwater lake, a beautiful lake in New Zealand called Wanaka. The engine came off it. The family wanted the engine back for forensic purposes. It was in 74 meters. The Navy they saw it with an ROV, but they couldn't get a line on it from the ROV. And so we were asked to go down there and dive it. And it was just friends doing favors for friends. There was no money. There was nothing, there was nothing professional about it. But that photo got taken of us sitting in the bucket of a front-end loader being put in the water, and that looks pretty professional, right? So it looks a bit occupational. And when it appeared in the paper, the occupational safety and health people here in New Zealand gave me this very embarrassing phone call, and it was embarrassing because I'm one of their medical consultants. It was like, oh, sorry, Professor Mitchell, we have to ask you about your illegal commercial dive in Lake Wanaka, because you're not allowed to do a commercial dive out of the bucket of a front end loader to 74 meters without appropriate support, etc. But I did a bit of fast talking and convinced them that actually it was just us doing a technical dive as a favor for some friends. But it looked bad. Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that would look kind of bad, wouldn't it? And those guys don't tend to take that sort of stuff lightly.
No.
At least I know in Ontario they don't if you do any illegal commercial work. So, so when you got into doing your technical diving, like how long after did you start? When did you start diving rebreathers?
Pretty much straight away, actually. It was very obvious to me that if you were going, especially down here in New Zealand, and actually I was in Australia at the time, but same thing really. It was obvious that if you were going to use helium, open circuit was not going to fly, because helium has always been and remains very expensive down here. And so although just to get the right ticks in the right boxes, I transitioned through open circuit trimix pretty quickly. I went fairly much straight to rebreathers, and rebreathers were new, right? Like, so we're talking 2001. So, the inspo had only really just, hit the market about 2 or 3 years before. There were almost no other rebreathers around. And in fact, my first rebreather was a US Navy Mark 15.5. So the old sort of pre-Mark 16 rebreather. It was an awesome unit, although it became impractical fairly quickly because it had these Inconel spheres for gas cylinders, and if you took one of those into a dive shop and asked someone to fill it, they'd look at you like you'd. Well, I won't get into any graphic detail, but they didn't like it very much, and so that just especially for travel, and especially after 9/11. It was clearly a military device, and everyone was very suspicious of rebreathers at that time. So I transitioned away from that into other rebreathers. But yeah, like right from the start of my technical diving, it was kind of rebreathers.
Wow, that's really cool. And I mean, you still do a lot of impressive diving. I mean, you've done, you helped identify the SS Cumberland. I also understand that you did in 2002 the deepest dive to a shipwreck.
Yeah, it was at the time. Yeah. So there was a famous wreck in Australia that it was actually a hospital ship that was torpedoed on its way from Sydney to Port Moresby, because the Japanese were right on Australia's doorstep at that point. And this ship sank very quickly. It had a full medical battalion on board, I think 263 or 4 Australian servicemen and women. Lots of medical people died, including 11 out of 12 female nurses who were going into a combat zone for the first time. So it was a big deal in Australia. And that, like all these wrecks, it got lost to history. And then about 1995, some dude claimed to have found it in 180 meters of water using an ROV. And the Australian government completely bought that story, and they gazetted the wreck site as it was called the Centaur. They built a church on the nearest point of land, and, the whole thing was, like it was memorialized. And we got the plans of the real Centaur and compared them to some of the video that had come out of this ROV, and we actually didn't think it looked like we thought it was the wrong wreck. But of course, you have to be careful talking like that, because you have all these people who think they know where their lost family members are, and there were even a few survivors alive at that time. And so we decided to dive it. Sorry, I'm not making a long story very short, but we ended up doing it. And yes, at the time, it was the deepest shipwreck dive that had ever been done. And that's not why we did it, of course. I mean, depth is a tool that gets you to places that you want to go to. It's not an end in itself. And I want to be very clear about that. But we did it because we wanted to solve this mystery. Anyway, turned out to be the wrong wreck. And that was very disappointing and quite discombobulating at the time, because, of course, we disenfranchised all these people who thought they knew, where this very sacred war grave was. But it's had a good outcome, that story. About 5 years later, the Australian government funded a search using the ship that found the Bismarck in the Atlantic. And they found the real Centaur a few miles further out from where we were, off the continental shelf, 2,000 meters of water, and no one will ever dive it, which is nice. But now, because we did that dive and found that it was the wrong wreck, these families are now throwing wreaths on the right wreck, which is a good outcome. That's a good thing.
Yeah, that's amazing. So you've also done, I see here that in 2023, so that's only a couple of years ago, you did a wet mule expedition to 230 meters using hydrogen.
Yeah, so just to be clear, the divers that did that dive were Richard Harris and Craig Challen. They're part of a group of Aussies called the Wet Mules, which I am part of now. I joined them for an expedition to the Pearce Resurgence, this amazing cave in the South Island of New Zealand. It's essentially a river that comes out of a hole in the ground. It's a deep cold water cave, so the minute you enter it, you're more or less descending. Within 50 meters, you're in a shaft that goes straight down to 115 meters, and then it just keeps going. In 2020,
Wow.
Craig and Richard Harris, of course, both of them are well known for their role in the Thailand cave rescue. Richard Harris was the anaesthetist or anesthesiologist who anaesthetized the boys. So we pushed the cave to 245 meters, and the problem there is you get to a depth like that, and you're encountering several issues that are difficult to solve sequentially, or at least at the same time. So basically, the gas you're breathing is very dense, but you're also encountering this thing called the high pressure neurological syndrome. And so that we think this is a pressure effect on nerves, and it creates a tremor, which is very unhelpful if you're trying to operate a rebreather or tie off cave line or whatever it is. And the way to overcome that on a deep bounce dive is to include nitrogen in the mix, because the small amount of narcosis that produces overcomes or helps overcome this tremor, this high pressure neurological syndrome. But nitrogen makes the gas very dense. So what we were looking for was a light gas that's also a little bit narcotic. Helium's light, but it's not narcotic. Hydrogen is light, and it is a little bit narcotic. And that was the reason why 3 years later we went back and trialed hydrogen as a breathing gas. So oxygen, helium, and hydrogen as a mix, to see if we could overcome the high pressure neurological syndrome, but without increasing the density of the gas. And again, to cut a long story short, it actually worked. So Harry and Craig did this dive to 230 meters. From 200 to 230 meters, Richard Harry had hydrogen in his loop, and it worked. So he gets HPNS quite badly, and it appeared to overcome that when he got to 230 meters. So very exciting, and potentially the way forward. Like if you want to dive beyond 250 meters with a gas of appropriate density and not have high pressure neurological syndrome, then hydrogen is a potential answer to that conundrum. But of course, it has challenges. It can burn and go bang. You have to be very careful with hydrogen. But certainly that's a line of research that we hope to take forward in the future. Yeah.
How did you even mix the gas for this? Because I imagine even just mixing the tanks would be pretty dangerous, would it not?
Yeah, potentially. So if you're going to, it turns out that so long as you combine hydrogen into a gas that has less than 4% oxygen or less, then it won't burn or explode. Now, the way we did it was Harry descended to 200 meters using Trimix with a set point in his rebreather of 0.7 atmospheres. So that meant that at 26 atmospheres, he had a fraction of oxygen in the loop of about 3%, so safe. And that's where he essentially added pure hydrogen into the loop at that point. So descended on Trimix, 3% oxygen, added hydrogen, descended to 230 meters, saw what happened, came back to 200 meters, and then initiated a flushing process to get rid of the hydrogen out of the loop by about 150 meters on the ascent, and then started increasing the oxygen in the loop for the decompression. That's how we did it. Yeah, quite a deal.
Wow.
Yeah, it's like, I mean, this is extreme experimental diving. There's no getting around that.
This isn't like what you see in the movies and you think, they'll never do that, right? Like, that's crazy.
Yeah. Well, I guess. But look, new trends or initiatives in practice change often start like this, through adventurers or explorers trying new things. They work, which is good. and then you can make progress. I mean, so what's happening now that we've done that dive is we're trying to formalize the process a little bit more. So we're hoping to do some research next year or the year after or both, where we look at actually measuring the narcotic effect of hydrogen under pressure using an EEG, so electrodes on the brain. And in that way, trying to figure out a way of optimizing the dose of hydrogen for these very deep dives. If we can measure the narcotic effect of the hydrogen and then titrate it to exactly how much you need, it'll help us be smarter with how much hydrogen we actually need to use. So that's an initiative that we're hoping to, follow over the next couple of years.
Wow. And where would you do that type of testing?
Oh, that'd be in a hyperbaric chamber. Yeah. And it needs to be a very capable hyperbaric chamber because it needs to go to very high pressures. So we may or may not even do that in New Zealand. We're not sure yet. Yeah.
What type of where would they even have these type of chambers for testing that would be good enough for what you want to do with this?
Oh, there's a bunch of them around the world. And there is one here that could probably do it, but they might not want to. Well, just because they're not used to, using it for experiments at those kind of depths. It's a clinical chamber. But, no, there's chambers in the US and Europe where those kind of pressures are certainly possible.
Wow, that's very interesting. And you said that this friend of yours, he actually is prone to getting HPNS?
Yeah. So Richard, well, we all are. I mean, I don't get it too bad, but then I haven't been to 245 meters. So on that 180 meter dive to what was supposed to be the Centaur, I didn't get HPNS, not that I noticed. Some people get it from about 150 meters, other people from deeper, but we will all get it. It's, everyone is prone. It's just some people are more prone than others. So, yeah.
So it's like narcosis. Actually, you can answer a question for me because I started diving again last year. I used to be a instructor, commercial diver. And I noticed, or maybe it's just me because I'm getting older and don't remember as much, but it seems I get narked a lot easier than I used to when I was younger. Is that true?
Well, I'll be honest. There are some things we don't know, which is one of the cool things about diving medicine, there's still lots of low-hanging fruit research questions that in any other field where they've got lots of money, they would have been answered 50 years ago. But that question you just raised is a fantastic question. Does being older make you more prone to narcosis? I would say that there's a very good chance that your observation is correct. But to my knowledge, and we've done quite a lot of research on narcosis, nobody's systematically done an experiment to answer that question. But it would be true of many drugs, and in this case, nitrogen is acting as a drug, that the older you get, the lower the dose you require to achieve the same effect. So, if you went to 50 meters breathing air when you were 20 and go to 50 meters breathing air when you were 60, there's a very good chance that you'll feel more narked when you're 60. But to my knowledge, no one's actually proven that.
Huh. Very interesting. So tell me, what are some of the tell me primarily what you do as far as your hyperbaric medicine roles in New Zealand at the chamber.
So open disclosure, I don't do any day-to-day hands-on hyperbaric medicine anymore. I was full-time in that field for a while. I'm an anesthesiologist, so 3 days a week I spend in the operating room looking after patients having surgery. And what I do though, is I do on-call for diving medical emergencies. So 1 night a week and 1 weekend in 4, I'm on call for our national diving emergency service. So, and look, to be honest, Curt, that is entirely intentional. Part of the reason I moved out of pure hyperbaric medicine is that the range of things that we treat, the types of problems in using hyperbaric oxygen is relatively narrow. So if you commit yourself to a career of just doing that, you're going to spend your life as a doctor treating non-healing wounds, radiation tissue injury. Those are the main things, actually. And there's nothing, and don't get me wrong, there's nothing wrong with that if that, pulls your chain. But I figured out quite some time ago that probably wasn't going to be enough for me. So what I wanted was a more kind of sharp-end medical specialty like anesthesia, which is very sharp-end, but to maintain my role in diving medical emergencies. So I have the perfect combination now. I'm an anesthesiologist, a scientist, I do research, but I'm also on call for the sick divers when they come in. So I get to see the things that I'm very passionate about, which is, decompression sickness, arterial gas embolism. We don't see huge numbers, not as many as we used to. Divers have got safer, I think, but I certainly see them, and that fulfills that interest that I have, that passion for the diving medicine field.
How many cases a year do you guys see generally?
It'd be about 15. It's not that many. It used to be like when I started when I was in the Navy, and the Navy was the single chamber for the entire country. In 1995, I think we treated 100 cases of decompression sickness. I think the next year we treated 70, something like that. So we were treating big numbers then. It's got less. There's a number of reasons for that, I think. I think that computers have changed the game quite a lot. I think that, in the old days, people used tables, which in some ways were more conservative, but they didn't teach you how to ascend, and computers tell you if you're ascending too fast. Dive tables don't. And computers
on a narrow gauge, it's not easy to like if you're used to using a computer now, and they said, "Okay, go back now, you're going to do it using a depth gauge."
Yeah, no, exactly. That's right. And I think that just that simple thing alone has probably contributed to safety. Computers build in safety stops, and tell you to do them. So, there's a whole bunch of things. So computers is one thing. I think the dive training agencies have done a pretty good job of teaching people to be conservative. So that has helped. Anyway, and the other thing that's important is that there are a lot of milder cases now, which by international consensus we recognise will get better even if we don't recompress them. So these are very mild symptoms of decompression sickness. And if they're in a remote location where it's difficult to get them to a chamber, we will frequently just treat them with surface oxygen and non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs after consultation with a diving doctor. Of course, we don't want divers making these decisions for themselves. But there's certainly a body of cases now that 20 or 30 years ago we might have evacuated for treatment because we weren't sure what their outcomes would be if we didn't. Now we're more sure that it's okay not to treat them, so long as they fit the strict definition of mild. And so those are cases that we might have treated back then, but we don't now. So there's another reason why we're treating fewer cases these days.
So what types of mild cases and symptoms would the average diver get? Because I bet you there's a lot of symptoms that most divers wouldn't even realize they were bent.
I think that's true, and I also think there's a lot of divers who do realize but don't say anything.
Okay, that is true.
There's actually pretty good evidence for that now. I've actually just come back from Helsinki in Finland, where the European Underwater and Baromedical Society was having their annual scientific meeting. And some of my Finnish colleagues did a fantastic study where they followed 55 technical divers over a year, and the divers logged all their dives and the dive outcomes. And at the end of the year, they pulled all that information together. And there were about 30 cases of decompression sickness amongst this group. I think there were about 3,000 dives that they'd done over the course of this year. Maybe 30 cases of decompression sickness that all had mild symptoms. So things like a rash or an itch, some musculoskeletal pain. So we're not talking about neurological problems or anything like. We're talking about mild things. And none of them, I think one got recompressed. The rest of them, all the other cases, something in the high 20s did nothing. Maybe self-treated with a bit of surface oxygen or fluids. And they all got better. But anyway, it just speaks to the point you made before that not only are there divers who don't realise that the pain they have or a little rash afterwards might be decompression sickness, there are those who do realise that it's probably mild decompression sickness and choose to not report it and not treat it. And they do get better, which of course is the basis for us deciding not to treat them if they fit that definition of mild and they're in a remote location. If they're close to a chamber, we will recompress them, of course. But anyway, I do think there's a lot of unrecognised or unreported decompression sickness out there. All of it's mild, of course. It's pretty hard to ignore it if you're paralysed. So people do report those more serious cases, and of course we evacuate them and treat them. But I do think there's quite a big burden of mild cases that probably don't get reported and don't get treated.
It was funny because when I started diving again last year, there were a bunch of us sitting around actually discussing decompression sickness and some of the symptoms and stuff like that. And we were all like, okay, our ages, our injuries, and from doing other stuff, like I'm full of titanium and I ache all the time. So, it would probably have to be pretty severe for like a bit normal over a minor case for me to even realize it. Probably,
yeah.
I think, wouldn't it?
No, you make a very good point. That's right. A lot of the symptoms, especially the milder symptoms of decompression sickness, are what we refer to as non-specific. In other words, they can be caused by a whole bunch of different things. And so it's easy if you suffer from one of those symptoms to kind of rationalize it and say, oh, I've got some pain in my elbow, but I was lifting those heavy tanks, or I was pulling on the ladder earlier, and that's probably what it is. And that may well be true, but uh, that is, it's you're exactly right. I mean, if any of us, especially slightly older people, sit here now and say, "Am I sore anywhere?" I can definitely identify one or two places where I'm sore. Right. So yeah, you're right. It can be tricky. And what we recommend is that if divers have a sense that they're experiencing something new that's not normal for them, then they should discuss it with a diving, a source of diving knowledge. So, and the obvious source is Dan. 24 hours, you can phone the Dan line, speak to someone who can give you good advice. And we do have Dan here in New Zealand, but we also have our own national diving emergency service as well. So those kind of services are available anywhere. And if you are concerned and you think that something's going on that isn't normal, then you should talk to someone. We do recommend that.
What about a symptom of being just overtired? Because I know that can also apparently be mild.
Yeah, well, we call that constitutional symptoms. So fatigue is one of those. And look, that's another example of one of these non-specific symptoms. I mean, you think about it. What does it look like on a dive boat when you're on your way back from a dive? Everyone's prostrated on the seats snoring. Like everyone's fatigued. Diving makes you tired. And yeah, I mean, could that be subclinical decompression sickness? I guess so in some cases, but that's not a symptom that we would treat on its own. Like if someone called me on the diving emergency line after a dive and said, I feel tired, do I need to be recompressed? I would say, do you have any other symptoms? And if the answer is an absolute unequivocal no, then I would reassure them and say, feeling tired after a dive is normal. You don't need recompression. If they weren't convinced that they didn't have any other symptoms, I might ask them to go to their local emergency department and get examined by a doctor who could then talk to me and we could have another discussion about it. But no, tiredness is not a specific symptom of decompression sickness. It can be part of it, but it would take other symptoms to be present before we'd be interested in recompressing someone.
All right, well, that's good to know for sure.
Perhaps the most valuable thing I can say in that regard is that the vast majority, and this is absolutely true, particularly in technical diving, the vast majority of cases that we see are people who've absolutely done nothing wrong. They have followed their computer, they've changed their gases to the right gas, the right time. They've completed their deco, and yet they still get symptoms. We see that commonly, and it is a very important point to make to divers that because, and this goes right back to my generation of early divers, there's always been this perception that if you get decompression sickness, you're a fool and you've done something wrong or you've made a mistake. And it's very important to dispel that, because that's one of the reasons, of course, people don't report it, because they're afraid of being judged. And it's very important to understand that even if you've done everything right, you can still suffer decompression sickness. And indeed, most of the people we see have done exactly that. I've actually had decompression sickness twice myself. Musculoskeletal pain in my upper arms. Both times were after long sort of intermediate depth dives, sort of 50 meter range, 130, 150 feet, 160 feet, that kind of range, doing very long dives. So twice, but neither dive did anything go wrong. I did everything I was supposed to do, but I got pain when I got to the surface. Interestingly, that depth range seems to be my Achilles heel. I've probably been deeper than 100 meters over 100 times. I've never had a problem on those dives. It's the intermediate depth dives that seem to bother me twice. But anyway, getting back to my key point, you do not have to have done something wrong to get symptoms. It's very common.
It's just one of those things. And unfortunately, there still is a lot of people that judge it that, oh, you got bent, you're.
Well, what you have to understand about all these decompression algorithms that we use, there's nothing magic about them, and they don't describe binary outcomes. So, like let's just take a no decompression limit for a simple, scuba air dive. Those no decompression limits don't mean that if you stick to the limit, you can't get sick. And if you exceed the limit, you will get sick. They don't mean that at all. Those limits simply represent someone's idea of a line in the sand of acceptable risk. But that line in the sand lies along a continuum of risk. And someone's just said, look, this is an adequate level of risk. If you want to have zero risk, don't get in the water. If you want to be sure you get decompression sickness, then do something like way crazier. But this is just a line in the sand of acceptable risk. And seen in that light, it makes perfect sense that if you do enough dives, at some point you're likely to have a problem. Probably a minor problem, especially if you haven't done anything, wrong or nothing's gone wrong in the dive. But you are likely to.
There's actually I had Steve from Sidemount Pros on my podcast, and he was talking how you guys actually in New Zealand, it's actually covered if you need hyperbaric treatment, which a lot of places aren't. And I mean, what about dive insurance? I mean, so you guys don't have to really deal with dive insurance stuff down there because it's all covered by your local insurance, even if you're a traveler there, I understand, correct?
Yes. Yeah, pretty much correct. So New Zealand has a government-funded insurance scheme that covers everybody for accidents in New Zealand. It doesn't cover me if I'm overseas, but it does cover me in New Zealand. So that's right. I mean, New Zealand has socialized healthcare. That always gets misinterpreted, particularly by Americans. They think it's communism or something like that. It's not. It's just where you pay enough tax so that the government can fund your healthcare, and it's sort of universal for everybody. But the accident thing is another layer on that here in New Zealand. And so it's true. If you get decompression sickness, you get evacuated, you get recompressed. Same if you fall off your motorbike, you'll get whatever treatment you need and some income recovery, etc., while you're rehabilitating. If you go overseas, though, we're in the same boat as you, same as you. We need diving insurance, and in that regard, I'm a outspoken supporter of Dan. I think they do a fabulous job. You'll always, you go on the forums and you'll find someone who wants to moan about some aspect of Dan's diving insurance. But I think what I think sets them apart is that they have this dive insurance kind of business, but the money that generates doesn't go into the pockets of shareholders. It gets plowed back into their research mission and their safety promotion mission. And I think for that reason, anyone who doesn't support Dan is bonkers. If you're a diver and you're traveling, you should have dive travel insurance, definitely. And Dan does a very good job of that. And the money they make from that gets plowed back into the safety/research mission, which I think is fabulous. And they're one of the few organizations in the world that does that and has money for research, which is why diving medicine is not it doesn't advance as quickly as other areas of medicine because finding money to do research is really hard. I mean, we've been lucky over the last 10 years. We've been strongly supported by the US Navy for our research program. And straight up, I am deeply grateful for that. There are a few philanthropists around who are diving passionate and who fund diving research, and Inkfish is a really good example of that. And we're very lucky to have those people. Again, deeply grateful, but it is hard. And so supporting an organisation like DAN that does plough money back into research is a really good thing to do.
I'm actually shocked since I started diving again last year on how many people do not get dive insurance at all. And they're like, I only dive once or twice a year. I'm not going to get bent.
Yeah, well, what surprises me about all that is how cheap the insurance actually is compared to the risk you take if you don't have it. I mean, DAN insurance, it's not like insuring your income or, some insurance is expensive, but you try insuring a pet or a dog or something, I mean, that costs big money. But DAN insurance for diving actually is relatively cheap. And that probably reflects the fact that the risk is relatively small. But if it happens to you and you're in the wrong place, it can be financially devastating. So,
it can bankrupt.
I mean, I don't want to come across as an insurance salesman because I'm not. But as a diving physician who handles international calls from various places, we get a lot of patients. Well, we get some patients from the Pacific. I've seen disasters, and I don't ever want that to be me from a financial perspective. So, strongly recommended.
So like, just to give some people an example, what can a evacuation in a chamber run cost if they're coming to your facility and they're not insured under your program?
If you come to us, we're actually pretty reasonable. I'll be honest, I don't even know what we charge for a chamber run here. But what I can tell you is that the evacuations, if you need a 1 atmosphere pressurized air ambulance, like a Learjet kind of thing, you can be talking 50, 100,000, to get you from a remote Pacific location to us could cost a lot of money. I did see some data just recently about other chambers in other parts of the world where a typical US Navy treatment table 6 was being charged out at something like $5,000 to $6,000 US. We wouldn't charge anything like that, but that's just for the chamber treatment. If you're paralyzed and you end up in a hospital needing an MRI scan or a CT scan and intensive care, the chamber treatments are the least of your worries. The rest of the costs will just balloon out. So, and that's the thing that would really worry you, is getting very sick in a remote place and having to be evacuated and then hospital care. It could be very, very expensive. The chamber treatments themselves, maybe not so much, but the whole package, very expensive.
Yeah, I've heard nightmares of that. In fact, when I did a Blackbeard's trip in April, and when I was in the Bahamas, and the lady who's organizing the trip, friend of mine, she warned everybody in the group. She says, stay within your limits, don't mess up, because apparently there was a lady on the trip before that she had been on, and she had been going way over her table limits and her certification level, and she got bent. They had to fly her out to Miami, and apparently it was like $100,000 or something like that by the time they were done, which is just insane.
Yeah, well, and in the United States, of course, the costs of medical treatment are very high. beyond our comprehension here. Oh no, look, we're just circling back to the same point. If you're going to dive, get down insurance. Pretty simple.
So, what do you also, I mean, I've noticed a lot. I've been using Nitrox since pretty well exclusively since I've started diving again. Do you think that Nitrox should be used by everybody?
Well, I think it would be good if it was used by everybody. I think there's a extra layer of training that's required to safely use higher oxygen fractions in the water. So, with the caveat that you need the appropriate training, which isn't hard, like lots of people do it now. Nitrox is incredibly common. You go on some dive trips or to various dive resorts, and everybody's diving Nitrox. So, yes, philosophically, I think it's a good idea. Even better if people use it to derive an increased level of safety rather than an increased period of time at depth. As you well know, and I'm sure all of your listeners know, that you can use Nitrox in two ways. You can use Nitrox and tell your computer you're diving air, so you get increased safety. I think that's a good thing. Or you can use the Nitrox to give yourself more time, or a blend of the two. But I think that using Nitrox for its safety characteristics is a good idea. Yeah, of course. Just bearing in mind that higher oxygen fractions, you can't go as deep. You have to keep an eye on that. Don't want to have a seizure underwater. So having the right training is important. Yeah.
Now, is there any type? I've never actually asked this to a hyperbaric physician before. Is there any underlying conditions that would cause you to where you shouldn't use nitrox because of the higher partial pressure of oxygen?
Well, yes, there is. Although most of them, many diving physicians would consider would be a contraindication to any form of diving, whether you're using air or nitrox. But for example, we have occasionally countenance diving by people, for example, who had a head injury and a seizure at the time, and then they have a period of years where everything's okay, so it all looks like it's settled down, but you can never be 100% sure that risk of having a seizure has completely gone away. And you basically don't want to do anything to provoke it more than you need to. So we know that high oxygen partial pressures can provoke seizures. So you might say to someone like that, look, okay, return to diving, probably best not to use high PO2s, keep that relatively low, and you might impose a depth limit and say just use air because that will keep you away from that seizure danger zone. The same would be true, for example, with someone who's been epileptic but has grown out of it, maybe been 5 years seizure free. It's quite controversial whether those people should dive, but if one were to dive, you might give them the same kind of advice. Best to avoid nitrox, best to avoid high PO2s, don't want to have a seizure underwater. So, and there's also one cancer therapy drug which does seem to sensitize the lungs to high pressures of oxygen later in life, even for some years. It's again controversial, but if someone who'd had that drug was going to dive, you might say to them, maybe best not to have nitrox, just air to a certain depth would be acceptable. So those are a few examples of where you might prescribe against using nitrox. Yeah.
So you were talking about epileptics. Do you think that after you've had epileptic seizures, you should be done diving, period? Or Depends on the case.
I think it's a case by case basis thing, Curt. I mean, I'm actually quite liberal when it comes to fitness for diving issues, almost to the point of being considered heretic by my conservative colleagues. But there are some things where I do draw the line. Again, we talk about continuum of risk. We mentioned that before, but so at one end of that spectrum, if you've got someone who's a brittle epileptic, there's no way they should be diving. Absolutely not. At the other end of the spectrum, you might have someone who had a febrile seizure as a child or had a seizure disorder that seemed to last a short time. People do grow out of them, and they've been seizure free for a decade, no drugs, no nothing. I would be reasonably happy to counsel someone about the theoretical concern, with oxygen and higher pressures and being underwater. And if they were happy to accept that risk as an informed risk acceptor, then I'd be reasonably happy for them to dive. The key thing is my duty in that setting is to make sure they understand the potential risk that they're accepting. And if people want to accept that risk, that's fine. I think smart people should be able to make informed choices. And then somewhere along that continuum of risk, you'll reach a point where you think, no, I'm just not happy. Even if they say, I don't care about the risk, I'm not happy. And I've seen this. I've had I implied a brittle asthmatic epileptic who can't clear their ears come in and say, I don't give a damn about any of that. I just want to dive. And it doesn't matter how motivated they are and how risk accepting they are. I wouldn't sign off on that because it's just overtly too dangerous. So, I mean, one of the things that we do as diving physician is risk assessment and then counseling people about their risk and allowing them to make informed choices. And that's, a pretty common approach these days, particularly to recreational diving assessments. Occupational diving is trickier because there are often rules around that, like set standards, and you just have to stick to those. But with recreational diving, there's more scope for informed risk acceptance. So we often do go down that pathway.
Cool. Well, I would like to thank you very much for joining me today on the podcast. It has been awesome having you on and talking about hyperbaric medicine and talking about all of your past diving adventures. So thank you very much for coming on today.
No, it's a real pleasure.
And all right. So everybody, thanks again. Have a great day. And remember, grab an adventure and live. And I will see you next time.